goosebumps every time, yeah, 713. To the 281, yeah, I'm riding. Why they on me? Why they on me? I'm flying, sipping low key. I'm sipping low key and honest, rider. I get those goosebumps every time. I'm around, cause I'm hard to make everything go fine. I get those goosebumps every time. I need the hype, throw that to the side, yo. I get those goosebumps every time, yeah. When you're not around, when you throw that to the side, yo. I get those goosebumps every time.
Off the mugs.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, everyone. We are back again, Loaded Mag NUFC for a little bit of a special tonight. We've got one of our favourite guests coming back on to talk all things associated party transactions, and it's been a very interesting few days since it all broke on Friday night. So we wanted to get the lowdown on what is now happening with that and what it could mean for Newcastle United, but also for the world of football. But boys, Daz, Chris, we all good. I know we're double heading tonight. We've gone from one straight to another, but all things good. Okay.
All good, mate. Yeah, all good. Cannot complain. Absolute pleasure as always to have Kieran back on. So really looking forward to hearing from him this evening. But yeah, on a personal level, mate, I am all good. Daz, how are you doing?
All good, as long as we can start to spend our own money. It's been a long time coming, so hopefully we have some good news eventually. I know we're not there yet, but let's talk about it a bit more.
Definitely. So let's welcome in the Practice Football's own Kieran Maguire. So welcome in, Kieran. How you doing?
I'm Kieran.
Great to see you guys. Hope you're all doing well. I presume you've all got Wembley fever.
Yes.
Just a little bit. We're all excited. Hoping to do ourselves better justice this time than we did 2 years ago. So fingers crossed.
It'll be a great day out. It'll be a great day out, regardless of the results. But clearly, yeah, winning and bringing a trophy back to St James's Park will be extra special. I can absolutely understand that.
Absolutely.
And we might have to do the double as well, but we have to get past a team called Brighton, I think, in the next round of the FA Cup.
Yeah, they lost 7-0 the other week. They're useless.
we see this a lot from opposition fans at the moment.
Yeah, playing it down.
Yeah.
We will see.
You're a bit Jekyll and Hyde these days, aren't you?
Just a bit.
I'm hoping for a reaction against Forest on Sunday, so we definitely need it. But Kieran, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back on with us. We always love the chat, and it's been a very interesting few days since Friday when it all broke. Valentine's Day, it's ruined so many Valentine's Days for everybody that we're celebrating, because the news that came out on Friday evening was that Matthew Lawton broke it along with Mike Keegan as well, that City score a major victory as Premier League sponsorship rules declared void. Lots of information on the back of that. Mike Keegan reports exactly the same in the Mail. And look, as it says on here, the verdict was in, and it was considered unlawful in their entirety. And that has massive implications from December the 2021, not long after the takeover of Newcastle United, which we all knew about, and we've talked so many times on this channel, up until November 2024, when the new rules were amended and put in place. Kieran, I just want to get your thoughts on this. One of our friends of the fan base, Nick DeMarco, also had his thoughts and opinions on this one, and that he said that it was his view at the time that the consequences of previous decisions were bound to be the entire APT scheme was unlawful. It was surprising how many people did not recognize this. What's your thoughts and feelings on the back of this news coming out? And what does it mean just in general, the fact that the Premier League have lost when they said that it wasn't as big a victory or a victory at all for Man City when it initially came out a while back?
Well, it certainly ruined my Valentine's night. And ironically, I was in Oldham on the morning on a panel with Mike Keegan. So we've been discussing various things. And he then left early. So I don't know whether he was getting... and I had to get from Oldham to Chelsea, Oldham to Brighton, because Brighton were playing Chelsea at night. I've not seen my missus for a week, because I work in Liverpool. So I booked a restaurant for 6 o'clock in Brighton. I said, well, we can go out and get a bit of food before the match. We need to do something together. The announcement came through at 5:30, and my phone just goes crazy. So I've got all of these journalists wanting bits and pieces, and my poor wife, who is, she has to put up with an awful lot, because I do sort of 60, 70 hours a week of this nonsense, as you probably know. She was not impressed, and then on to drag her to a football. I mean, she likes football. She's got a season ticket, because otherwise she'd never see me at all. But, and you understand that as guys. I'm sure you've got partners who have to make compromises, and we love and appreciate our partners for that. It was just as well that Brighton. I hate Chelsea more than I hate Crystal Palace, which for a Brighton fan is something which I never thought I'd say. And my wife, I love her to bits, but I love her even more, because after about an hour, she's joining in. My wife's a school head, really sort of proper professional, wonderful woman. She's singing, Mark Cucurella, you know who you are. Just giving it loads, which is absolutely fantastic. But back on topic, I think those of us who thought that it was more than a coincidence that the original set of APT rules were introduced, A, in haste, and B, as a getting your revenge in early decision by the Premier League, following the decision to approve the acquisition of Newcastle United by PIF. We're actually saying, well, we told you so. You've not drafted these rules particularly well. Certainly, if you take a look at other recent decisions, the Premier League lost their case against Everton when it came to the interest on the loans. It got absolutely having its trousers taken down by Leicester City, who managed to prove that the Premier League's own rules meant that Leicester City were not in the Premier League in 22-23, when Leicester City finished 19th in the Premier League, or where it was, got relegated. So I think there was a bit of Schadenfreude there from people who felt that the rules had been rushed. And Manchester City are feeling absolutely vindicated in all of this, because Manchester City, and let's face it, Newcastle United have been, I think they played an absolute blinder. They've just sat by the sideline. So if City lost, then City incur all the legal costs. If City win, Newcastle United are now in a position to say, well, we've had to negotiate deals, we've had lost opportunities from potential commercial partners, and now we need to have a conversation. We need to have a conversation internally at the club, and it could be we then need to have a conversation with the Premier League to say, we've made decisions, we've lost players. We could have, if we'd been able to sign deals with associated parties, and people not familiar, these terms are very confusing. Under the accounting rules, there's something called a related party, and that formed the basis for the old fair market value decisions. And a related party is actually quite a narrow definition. The Premier League then expanded the definition of somebody connected with the club. And that meant that more people were sort of caught in the net, or more potential partners were caught in the net, which meant that it made it more difficult for Newcastle. And also in terms of what is a fair market value, those rules have changed as well. So if I was Newcastle, I would feel both delighted with the result and furious because it's resulted in Newcastle having a competitive disadvantage over the course of the last 3 years.
And so this is almost, like you said, been the case for Newcastle United, particularly with the fan base who have been fighting this all the way through, that it was clearly attack to stop Newcastle United, although it wasn't officially said, although we have had information and documents come out that effectively name Newcastle to a point that was part of the reason why it happened. Even more so today, there's been a lot of news coming out off the back of, in particular, the seller deal that's been done. And there's lots of redacted information that's come out of here off the back of that with regards to Newcastle United's sort of deal with seller, and the fact that we had to sort of renegotiate that. And there is sort of information to the tune of, we eventually got 25 million for that deal, but there was rumours to be a deal agreed with seller for 30, potentially more, but 30 is that ballpark figure that people are working with. And with that fallout of the fact that Man City did win that case against the Premier League, there is talk that we can now potentially look at teams, whether they're suing the Premier League or looking for some form of compensation. Do you see Newcastle United in that bracket, not just for that seller deal, but potentially for other deals that we've done that may have been either held back or told to go back and renegotiate with the particular company? Is there scope for Newcastle United and others to do that? And do you think there's a genuine chance that we can win that?
Well, first of all, I've got to stress I'm not a lawyer. But I have spoken to a few lawyers, and I'm on WhatsApp conversations with Nick, and I think the world of Nick. He's scrupulously fair. He's forensic in his attention to detail, and he's a thoroughly good guy as well in so many regards. But I've actually heard this from other lawyers. They say, first of all, it's absolutely essential that Newcastle has evidence that it has suffered financially in terms of an inability to generate what it would consider to be its full market value for front of shirt deals and other potential deals in terms of specific partners. And if it can evidence that, and the rules have now been deemed to be null and void throughout that period of November 2021 to November 24, then provided the potential financial compensation exceeds the costs of pursuing it, then it would be the logical thing to do. And I think we've got, to a certain extent, I've got a huge amount of sympathy for Newcastle United. We were very, very lucky that some of the sides that have been promoted in the last 2 or 3 years have been so rubbish that they've gone straight down, because we could have lost. If Forest or Everton had been relegated on the back of points deductions, on the back of not being themselves being able, I think the potential financial consequences for the Premier League could have been absolutely catastrophic. Newcastle, I think have lost out, and I suspect they will either individually, or we could, whether you could have a class action in relation to this, if there's 3 or 4 clubs that decide to come together and put together a collective claim. I think that's unlikely. I think it would have to be done on a club by club basis. But it's not good news for the Premier League. However, the Premier League have tried to spin it, and initially they said when the ruling came out before Christmas, where they were trying to say that, we see it as a victory, and they're going to use this thing called the blue line. We effectively just go through the document with a squidgy pen, with a Sharpie, rub out a few lines, and then we've got APT Mark II all set to go. I think they're quite terrified now. Manchester City have certainly walking with a swagger. And boys and girls in Manchester like to walk with a swagger. Have you ever seen Liam and Noel walk? And of course, there's a separate action from Manchester City that relates to the new APT rules, which were voted for 16-4
November.
But but that's not an overwhelming majority. I can't think before the last sort of 18 months to 2 years when any vote went through at the Premier League, it was always 20-0. At most, it would be 9. At worst, it would be 19-1. So you've got a very fractured Premier League. You look at that vote of 16-4. Well, it's the 4 include Manchester City and what I would refer to as the challenger clubs, and I could include Newcastle United, Villa, Forest are the challenger clubs. The Premier League managed to persuade a few other clubs to come onto its side, but City must be feeling extremely confident that this second charge will be successful. And if so, I don't really know where it leaves the Premier League.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk at the moment that it could leave the Premier League open for all clubs to be able to negotiate their own sort of sponsorships without that sort of hold that the Premier League have held for so long, for nearly 4 years now. In particular, we go back and we were reading stuff with regards to Newcastle United where with some particular sponsorships or maybe all of them, is that they had to present multiple offers from multiple different places to justify their sponsorships, and that doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem fair that they have to do that, any club in particular, but we read it from a Newcastle United perspective. Could it be, and this is the big question that I think everyone wants to know, and we may not even have the answer to this, but we'll ask anyway, is that, could it be that once that second APT is being confirmed to be sort of null and void, which lots of people are speculating it's likely to be now because of the first rule, that clubs will be able to then, during that period, be able to negotiate their own sponsorships. I mean, Newcastle fans at the moment are saying, Peter Silverstone, make sure that you're ready to get going on sponsorships and be able to get investors in sponsorships into what we're anticipating. Could that genuinely be the case?
Well, the rules are in play at present, so you have to abide by them. But if at the same time Newcastle United and other clubs can say, here is evidence of alternate deals that we could have signed for higher sums, and we can, let's say that the vote goes in favour of Manchester City, then I think Newcastle can legitimately say, well, we're going to sue the Premier League for not being able to apply these deals since November 24, and now we're going to sign them on the dotted line today going forwards. Whilst I think people also have to be slightly cautious, because remember, I would say that there's a 98% chance of Newcastle United participating in European competition next season, and therefore you still have to abide with UEFA's rules. Having said that, UEFA's punishment of Barcelona for a breach of the rules this year was a really small fine. And if that's going to be the precedent, again, if I was a Newcastle United executive, I would be absolutely delighted if that's the approach that's going to be taken by UEFA.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
And that's, I think, the thing that Newcastle United fans are thinking about right now, because, of course, we know that we're so far behind with revenues and being able to justify that PSR stance. We know that PSR has now been extended for another season. And, we're looking at where we can get ahead in those positions to be able to be competitive, more competitive. Like I said, you referred to us in Forest and Villa as a challenging club. There's the ultimate question that obviously that some fans are saying, oh, they're just going to rejig it just to help out the cartel in their words, and saying, oh, they're going to find a way of stopping Newcastle United again. But is there a realistic way, even if they do come up with if the APT2 gets put aside and that's also deemed unlawful too, surely the rules that eventually whatever come in place cannot be as strict or restrictive as these ones have been recently, and we'll be in a position where we can flex our muscles a little bit more. Surely they won't ever be as strict and restrictive as they have been for the last 4 years.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I mean, you don't want to be prejudiced, you don't want to be cynical, but the timing of all of this really stinks. Newcastle United still only have commercial income in their most recent financial statements of £47 million. Now that compares to 350 for Manchester City, 250 for Manchester United, and so on. So I don't think that Newcastle United are not asking to have more than their opponents. And I think if Newcastle went from 27 million to 800 million, then I think that would be, I think even Newcastle fans would say, yeah, okay, that's taking the mickey a bit.
Yeah.
But to be in an opportunity to catch up, which has been prevented under these set of rules, to be given the opportunity to have more of a level playing field. And when you hear the executives from the Premier League, they say, oh, no, we don't want a level playing field. And the reason why they don't want a level playing field is that they still fear that the big six will go down their own end of the street and try to do something. And remember, it was only, 4 years ago that under Project Big Picture, one of the proposals was that if the big six clubs had not got their own way, that they were going to resign from the Premier League and join the EFL as a way of bullying other clubs, including Newcastle United, because remember, Project Big Picture was before Super League, was going to try to, and that's the type of people that you're dealing with, and they're now trying to present themselves as the good guys in all of this, against the nasty Newcastle United, who have got 1/5, 1/6 of the commercial revenues of some of these clubs. So I think it is messy. I can't see how they can make the rules as strict as they are at present. I'm a Brighton fan. If the APT rules in respect of loans had existed when Brighton were promoted, Brighton were promoted the same season as Newcastle United. Yeah. Brighton's owner had lent the club £400 million. If all of a sudden you have to go and create a non-existent amount of interest for PSR purposes, Brighton wouldn't have been able to sign any players in that first season in the Premier League, and they'd have been relegated. And we wouldn't be the darlings of the media. And even myself as a Brighton fan, and many of my mates, we get a bit sick of it. We benefited from having a fantastic owner, and nobody's denying that. And as far as I'm concerned, Tony Bloom walks on water. But Brighton benefited from 0% interest loans, and you can understand why City therefore have said that if we're going to have APT rules applying from 21 to 24 in terms of commercial deals, then it's got to be backdated for these loans as well. And I'd hate it as a fan, as a fan of my club, but I understand where City are coming from, and therefore I think Newcastle United have got a very valid case.
Kieran, can I ask you a Mystic Meg type question? So get your head on here. So we've had three transfer windows where we haven't been able to buy anyone. As you know, we sold one of our young stars to Brighton, of course, as well in Minta. But
I'm sure you were cheering him on Valentine's night.
We were. Yes, we were. He helped us out. But look, how do you see the summer going for Newcastle? Do you, as in, with all this APT talk and potential compensation, potential loosening of it, and also that we were kind of keeping our powder dry? Do you see us having a good summer in the transfer market, money wise?
I think the outcome of the second case and also the outcome of the Manchester City 115 charges, because that has implications for Newcastle United as well. Because if Manchester City, if that result doesn't come out until July, we're expecting it out in March or April, but it doesn't come out until July or August, and Manchester City start on next season on -60 points. all of a sudden Newcastle could be in the Champions League. They could be, I wouldn't say certain, but they could be extremely confident of finishing top 4, top 5 next season as well. And you put that all into your budget, and that does make things very positive, as well as the Premier League perhaps wanting to reach a settlement in terms of the historic issues, in terms of the APT rules. Because if it goes to a tribunal, the Premier League's legal costs have just gone through the roof. It's 50 to 60 million pounds. And that's got to be borne by all 20 clubs. And then it could be that the Premier League's actually under pressure from a lot of clubs to say, well, we don't want it that 50 to 60 million to go to 100 million, plus the potential of having to go and pay out compensation to Newcastle and perhaps 2 or 3 other clubs, because all of those costs ultimately have to be borne by the 20 members of the Premier League. And ultimately, they're borne by us as fans as well, in terms of ticket prices, in terms of merchandise prices, in terms of everything that we have to pay.
What would a negotiation look like? So, for example, going to arbitration again, you've just said it could be a really difficult situation for the Premier League, with the legal fees, as you just mentioned, the potential of losing, which at this point does look quite highly likely, and a lot of people are speculating they'd be highly likely that they lose their APT too. What would a negotiation potentially look like in that situation? What could they negotiate out of that?
Well, you reach a bit of a compromise. You say, we both want to save on legal costs. Newcastle, I mean, the story that's doing the rounds is that the seller deal was worth 30 million and Newcastle had to settle for 25 in order to get it through the Premier League. So if you're doing that for 3 seasons, it's 15 million.
Mm-hmm.
Let's call it 10. We'll give you a 10 million credit for APT for your PSR calculation, or we'll give you 10 million pounds physical compensation, and that will save your legal costs, and that will save our legal costs. Yeah, the whole point is to negotiate something where whenever you go into a negotiation, you should always try to arrange that even the losing party is able to say, well, we managed to have some element of success. So if the Premier League says, well, we've probably saved ourselves a bit of money in terms of compo, but we've also saved ourselves legal costs and so on, then that could be beneficial. And that would be beneficial for Newcastle United Football Club as well. As much as, I'm a huge fan of Nick, and I'd imagine every single Newcastle fan is a huge fan of Nick. He doesn't need another 5 mil.
No. Kieran, can I ask you, and I putting to one side, obviously, the seller deal, which I know there was news came out on that today. But, I mean, I'm looking, obviously, from a selfish point of view, with my black and white glasses on, I'm looking and thinking, we recently heard that Newcastle were in for Kusanov, who ended up at Man City. Now, obviously, that this is kind of a new period, not the period we're talking about. So they probably couldn't bring that one up unless, obviously, AP2 got rejected. But what I wanted to know was, if, let's say, APT1's been rejected, APT2 gets rejected, what do you think the possibilities are that Newcastle maybe point to the Yankuba Minter deal, maybe point to the Elliot Anderson deal and go, well, you're offering us compensation, but we've had to sell 2 youngsters there who we didn't want to sell. And I know a lot of people in the chat are asking that question as well. What do you think the chances are that Newcastle trying to explore that with the Premier League and say, well, obviously hindsight's a wonderful thing, but we would never have sold either of those 2 players, but we were forced to under the previous rules, which you're now saying is null and void. Where do you think that puts us in terms of, from that point of view?
It is conjecture, but those players were sold right at the end of June, and they were sold purely for PSR reasons. Yeah. I think you can therefore claim that is it negligence by the Premier League in terms of the rules that it introduced? And again, I have to stress, I'm a teacher, I'm not a lawyer. Yeah. In negligence, what you say is, do I have a duty of care towards Newcastle United as the Premier League? Yes, you do. Has there been a breach of that duty of care? Will Newcastle United have had to sell players as a result of this negligence? Again, if proven, then in which case, breach of care has then you try to quantify the damage which has been done. And again, I think that from a legal point of view, you would imagine that Newcastle United would be consulting its counsel, counsel as in COUNSEL.
Yeah. Do you know what, Kieran? William Smith in the chat. I think he solved it, and I'm sure you'll agree with this. Just send him into bath.
Yeah. Well, and for the right fee. You know what Tony Blue's like, and get the Premier League to pay the difference.
Yes, there you go.
There you go. I think some other questions I think related to this in the chat is we've got so many, well over 400 in the chat. Make sure you do all that good housekeeping. Make sure you click that like, and thank you for tuning in for what's been a fantastic chat so far with Kieran, as it always is. But if you're happy to answer a few questions, Kieran. I've only got. I've moved to a new apartment and I'm not near a plug, so I've only got 21% remaining on my battery. That's all. That's the only issue. We'll do some quick fires for you, mate.
Right.
And some of them, in fairness, Kieran, I don't think you're going to be able to answer, but we'll put them towards you anyway. Say no comment. One from Rich, and I think we'd all love to know this, but Rich Joblin asked, when would Newcastle now look to ramp up sponsorship acquisitions?
I don't think they can do anything at present because APT2 is still in existence until it's not in existence.
Yeah.
I think they could certainly be looking round for potential sponsors, and if those sponsors are Saudi Arabia or Middle Eastern based, well, so what? You look at Manchester City do have a much broader portfolio of sponsors than they did in 2009 when Sheikh Mansour acquired the club, but they've still got some very significant sponsors in that area. So I think it's a case of now opening the door for negotiations, but not being able to sign off on the deal. And then you could argue that they should be backdated. And I know one of the issues that Manchester City had, they said that the Premier League was taking so long. And this was one of if you go back to the first hearing in relation to APT before Christmas when it came out, City did say that they felt that the Premier League was using delaying tactics, and therefore sponsors had walked away. And I think they're going to seek compensation for that. Well, could it be argued that ATP2 has resulted in Newcastle United being unable to get deals over the line? They've lost sponsors as a result. If, and it's a big if, it has to be said, if APT2 is rejected, then I think if Newcastle in a much stronger position to demand some form of financial recompense.
Just on the back of Rich's question, there's been a lot of Newcastle fans, particularly over the last 6 to 8 months, that have been not necessarily questioning the club, but questioning why the club haven't gone for a training ground sponsor or a training ground kit sponsor, the stadium sponsor. All these things that were potential sponsorship had a capacity for, and we haven't taken advantage of that. Do you think now with this ruling on Friday that came out, do you think, in your opinion, that Newcastle United may well have been holding back on those things, knowing that something like this could potentially come about? And just on the back of that, with the arbitration for the APT2, do you think that could be done and dusted by the summer, or do you think that will run into the summer? There's two things on that, sorry.
I think there's no reason why it can't be sorted over the summer. In relation to the naming rights issues, what you don't want to do, because a naming rights deal is only of value if it's long term. Because nobody refers to the Coventry Building Society Stadium, do they? It's the Rico. Nobody called it the Macron or the Bolton Building Society. And I think it's very funny that Bolton Stadium is now called the Tough Sheet Stadium. I think that is funny, but it's still the Reebok to me.
Yeah.
So I think it's absolutely essential that whatever the deal is, it's a long-term deal. So what Newcastle, and I think here they've probably done the right thing. If they 2 years ago said, we've got a deal with Highland Spring, or whatever, I've got a bottle of Highland Spring in front of me. We've got a deal with Highland Spring. It's a 10-year deal. It's worth £5 million a year. And then 2 years later, or 18 months later, APT comes through, and it could have been, it could have been a Saudi Airlines deal worth 4 or 5 times as much. They're now in a position, because they've kept their powder dry, to be able to go and negotiate far more lucrative deals. So my gut reaction is that they have been playing the long game, and that could now significantly benefit the club going forwards, even though on a short-term basis, and as football fans, we are all guilty of being obsessed with the short term. We've been following football long enough to know, if you go, say, Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, and you pick up 1 point out of 9, it's the end of the world, isn't it? But having a longer term view, having a strategy, having a culture, having a horrible thing, believing in the process, will reap more rewards on a longer term basis than just moving from window to window and signing anything who's got a good YouTube reel.
If we were to land in the Champions League as well, that would help boost it up that little bit more when we're starting it off. But let's go to another question. I'm going to couple two together here. One from Jimmy Watt, who asked the question, if Man City win again, maybe APT2, could this be the end of the Premier League as we know it? And also with that, Tom asks, do we expect Richard Masters to resign? It's a bit hypothetical there for out of your arena.
I'd rather not answer the second one, because
that's fair enough. Yeah,
Richard Masters is coming to my workplace next week.
Okay.
I also think Richard Masters
makes sense.
I think and also I have to say that Richard Masters, on a personal level, is a very decent human being, and he's got a pretty horrendous job to do now. So I'm looking at this from a personal level. If you force him to resign, is that addressing the issue? Because he's there as the chief executive in terms of trying to apply the wishes of the individual club owners, and all that happens, you get somebody else who has to do exactly the same role. So I don't think necessarily if these it's just a case of scapegoating. He's not a lawyer. He didn't devise the rules. I think the rules as they were devised incredibly poorly, and that's why we've got to the messy situation that we're in.
So it's more about changing the culture within that process rather than just changing one individual.
Yeah. And remember, how often have we seen clubs change managers? Because that is the easy thing to do, but it doesn't actually change the culture of the club or the culture of the organisation of the Premier League in terms of how it wants to market itself and manifest itself change. Just because you get rid of one person, I'm not so sure.
Okay.
I think we lost Chris. He's getting ready to protest at your workplace, Kieran, for next week. But let's move to a question from Bill. Bill asks, if the Premier League rules are found to be unlawful, would that also potentially undermine UEFA's rules, since UK and EU competition law are essentially identical? He asks.
No, because the UEFA rules are different. And the Premier League brought in rushed rules in 2021. They are different to UEFA rules. I think UEFA can say, if you want to be in our competition, you abide by our rules. Yeah. So I think there's going to be less. But I would reiterate, if the penalties for breaking the UEFA rules are as modest as we've seen in the form of Barcelona, it's a bit like if you're finding a millionaire £50 for spitting on the pavement, well, they're going to pay £50 fine, aren't they? And keep spitting on the pavement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's go to maybe one or two more last questions, Kieran, because we've covered a lot of them already in our discussions. But I guess this one from Tom again. He asked, "Why did we have to keep PSR for another season?" Right? Because we were going to that SCT or CR.
Squad cost rules.
Yeah, there's no point changing the rules if the rules, if you haven't defined what is fair in terms of, you think about your 3 tranches of revenue for a football club, which is match day, broadcast, and commercial. If those, and in terms of commercial, if our calculations of commercial is going to have to be completely revisited, then that has implications for the cost control element. So wait until we get the Manchester City APT verdict 2, and on the back of that, move forward with the set of rules. I mean, those rules are to protect Newcastle United, because as much as anybody else, we're assuming that PIF want to put in unlimited amounts of money into Newcastle United. That's not the case. Now, I think you've only got to look at some of the noises which are coming out of Saudi Arabia. They're looking at a broad portfolio of investments in a global environment which nobody knows what's going to happen in terms of global security, global safety, and so on. And will PIF want to be seen to be throwing money into football clubs when they've got perhaps things close at home to deal with? I'm not so sure.
Okay.
That's less it for the questions that I think that we haven't discussed.
Yeah, there was one little rumor that, when the initial ruling came out, I think back in October, that there was sort of like a partial victory from Man City, and there was all the forward back on the back of that. There was rumors that between that period in October and November, when the second amended rule was kind of pushed through, that there was a window potentially where there was no rules in place, and actually anybody could have potentially got sponsorships in place, and it would have been okay. Is there a possibility? And I'm not suggesting that you'll know this, but is there a possibility that any club could have got a sponsorship or two in during that period? We've seen 1 or 2 new sponsorships that popped up. PIF, for example, have been banded around in St James's Park on our screens in recent weeks. I'm not saying that's actually happened, but could it be the case that those sponsorships potentially could have gone through during that period and would have been passed through because there was no rules in place?
I think potentially. I've heard Stefan Borson say this, and Stefan, as you know, is a lawyer. He's regularly on TalkSport. He's very thorough. So Stefan's made, I think, some valid points along those lines, and I take his view rather than mine because he's from a legal background.
Right. Okay. Be interesting to maintain that. But
last question, Kieran. Sorry, because I think it's a good one here from Ali. Ali asked a question because we saw you on the overlap right before the last PSR deadline. But she asked, which clubs will have PSR issues in June, or do we know yet? What's your thoughts? Because we might want to go shopping at those clubs.
Hopefully not Newcastle.
Yeah, I think Newcastle, on the back of a successful season, finishing top 4, I think you'll be okay. The profits from the sales of Minte and Anderson, and also a couple of players have gone in January. Is that the case?
Yeah.
So I don't see a huge issue there. Leicester, I think Leicester will go down. Well, fair chance they'll go down. I think Leicester on a really sticky wicket. Manchester United will be fine, despite all of the protestations which are coming from Ineos. They are just very duplicitous because they're just trying to they get their kicks from sacking staff. And all this talk, it's difficult decisions, blah 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 blah. They're a horrid bunch of individuals, and they're as somebody that lived in Manchester for 40 years, celebrating losing 300 jobs is. For all the faults of the Glazers, and I'm huge critics of the Glazers, to say that one of the worst things that they've done is to create jobs in Manchester is completely daft. No, it's absolutely bonkers. So I think Manchester United are fine. Everton should be okay. Villa, I think they're running close, but again, they sold Duran in January. That's bought them out of it. So I think the fact that clubs have been using the player trading model pretty well in the second half of the summer of 24 and the start of 25. Brighton are fine. If you want to come back and add an extra 50 million to Minte's price from last summer, Tony Bloom's always willing to talk. And I don't. Spurs are in a strong position. Liverpool very strong. Manchester City strong. I'm looking at those clubs. No, Palace. Yeah, Palace run a fairly tight ship actually. As much as I loathe Palace, they're a well-run club.
Could Wolves be in that mix? I don't know if you mentioned Wolves previously.
Yeah, I mean, Wolves have certainly been mentioned, but again, I think what tends to happen for a club like Wolves, and I'll just rack up I've got about 4% left.
No, that's okay.
My Wolves spreadsheet here. Wolves have lost substantial amounts. They've lost 111 million in the last 2 seasons. That's before doing your add backs. So they again, one sale will probably put them in a strong position. I think you're more likely to be able to pick up bargains from Wolves if they're relegated, of which there is let's be honest, Southampton 98% down, then it's 2 from 3. I mean, of the 3, I think Wolves are the best football team, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're best at grinding out results. Yeah. So I think that'll be an interest. If they're relegated, then Kuna is a fantastic player, and they got one or two others who, let's be honest, who I think you'd be delighted to sign.
Don't worry.
Right, well, Chris, but Kieran, it's been a great chat. Honestly, I know it's obviously so difficult because you've been bombarded with calls and people calling for your opinions on this. So we really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to answer some of our questions. We'd love to have you back.
You've always been an absolute delight to have a chat with, guys. So it's a pleasure and it's an honour to be asked back.
Thanks, Kieran. And say hello to Mrs. Maguire for us as well. This is for Valentine's Day.
Well, if I ever see her.
Oh, yeah. Well, you don't see her.
I'm currently 250 miles away from her.
But if you get the opportunity to. But last of all, we'd love to have you back in the summer when hopefully we get some more news off the back of any sort of decisions being made and what it might look for Newcastle United. But it's a pleasure. Make sure everyone goes and listens to The Price of Football. Fantastic podcast. Great insight into all things football finance from Kieran and the team. So, Kieran, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, and you take care.
All the best, guys. Take care and
mind yourself.
Good luck, and have a fantastic day out at Wembley.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Fingers crossed.
Bring home some silverware.
Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant stuff. Great to have Kieran on with us as always. And guys, that's it. So we've got our lowdown on what's happening with Newcastle United. There is definitely some possibilities there with the sponsorships. The question I asked at the end, and Stephen Borson did mention it with regards to that window between October and November when those sponsorships in place. It's an interesting one, and the reason why I thought it was because we had all of a sudden PIF just around our stadium. Who's to say that a monster deal wasn't put in place, and we don't know about it? Probably not, but it'd be interesting to see what's happening. But great chat.
Great chat. That is it from us for tonight. And as we're going to leave you, we'll say, because with also the news that Craig Hope had, there's no plan to sell any of our star players, even if we don't get Champions League or maybe European football. So we're going to see this one for a while longer. So, but good night, everyone. See you soon. Thursday.
sir.